A Boeing 777 hangs exactly 85 feet above the Dubai runway. Its engines are at idle, producing no meaningful thrust. The landing gear is mechanically folding back into the fuselage. Gravity and drag are already overtaking the aircraft's forward momentum. 2 hours earlier, Emirates Flight 521 departed Trivandrum, India, for a routine morning flight to Dubai on August 3, 2016. In the cockpit sat 2 highly experienced pilots. The captain and his first officer had a combined total of over 15,000 flight hours and completely clean safety records. The aircraft itself was a 13-year-old Boeing 777, operated by an airline consistently ranked in the global top 10 for safety. Since its founding, Emirates had never experienced a fatal hull loss. Yet, with a fully functional aircraft and an elite crew at the controls, this plane is seconds away from a catastrophic belly landing onto the concrete. This crash is the result of a lethal intersection: localized meteorological anomalies, rigid automation logic, and human psychological breakdown. To understand exactly how a perfectly good airplane falls out of the sky, we have to look at the system's engineering data, step by step. And that starts with the specific atmospheric interaction at the destination airport. Upon arrival at Dubai International Airport, the ambient air temperature had reached an extreme 49 degrees Celsius. A high-pressure system of hot desert air was forcefully interacting with 2 cooler, low-pressure systems rolling in from the coast. This chart shows the resulting runway conditions. The atmospheric collision generated identical 13-knot tailwinds, pushing inward from opposite ends of the exact same landing strip. This opposing wind phenomenon creates severe wind shear, a condition that violently alters the localized airspeed and lift of any aircraft flying through it. Meanwhile, the dark asphalt of the runway surface had baked under the midday sun to a staggering 68 degrees Celsius. This extreme surface heat generates powerful columns of rising air, known as thermals, pushing straight up from the ground. Right before Flight 521's arrival, 2 other aircraft encountered this exact wind shear anomaly and were forced to abandon their landings and go around. But those crews failed to report the specific wind shear hazard to air traffic control. The data was never relayed. As Flight 521 began its final descent, the pilots were operating without data on the highly volatile wind shear and thermal columns directly in their path. On short final, the tailwind suddenly shifted into a headwind. This abruptly generated an excess of upward lift across the wings. Combined with a premature pitch adjustment by the pilot and the rising thermal columns from the hot asphalt, the aircraft refused to settle. It began to float. This diagram shows the spatial consequence. The aircraft glided dangerously past the designated 900-meter safe touchdown zone. As the plane floated, the right main landing gear briefly and lightly contacted the runway asphalt. This flowchart illustrates Boeing's automated safety logic. At its core is the weight on wheels, or WOW, sensor. The engineering rationale is strict. It prevents the aircraft from accelerating into a catastrophic runway overrun. The instant the right gear touched the ground, the WOW sensor activated, permanently disabling the automated thrust switches. Realizing they had overshot the landing zone, the captain commanded a go-around. He pressed the now-dead TOCA button and pulled the nose up. The first officer called out positive climb, based solely on the upward pitch of the nose. He failed the mandatory protocol to manually verify that the engine dials were actually increasing thrust. The automation logic, meant to prevent runway excursions, effectively locked the engines at idle during the most critical moment of the go-around attempt. Operating under the false assumption that automated thrust was climbing, the captain commanded the landing gear to retract. Without engine power, aerodynamic drag and gravity rapidly overcame the aircraft's remaining forward momentum. The aircraft stalled at exactly 85 feet in the air and began a deadweight sink toward the concrete. This graph compares the required thrust responses. Standard wind shear escape protocol dictates that pilots must entirely bypass the automated system and manually jam the throttles to maximum power. Hearing the automated ground proximity warning, the captain finally realized the error and applied manual max thrust, but it was too late. Large turbofan engines have a mechanical limitation. They require a latency period of several seconds to spool up from idle to maximum thrust. The Boeing 777 slammed onto the hot runway with its gear retracted. It slid for 800 meters on its belly as friction ignited the right engine bay. The moment the landing gear was commanded to retract while the software locked the engines at idle, the crash transitioned from a potential risk into an unavoidable mathematical certainty. Surviving the kinetic impact was only phase 1. Now 300 souls were trapped inside a burning, smoke-filled aluminum tube. In the cockpit, the crew lost roughly 1 critical minute searching through the chaotic crash debris for the physical emergency evacuation checklist before giving the official order. Inside the cabin, human behavioral logic collapsed. Instead of fleeing the encroaching fire, passengers stopped to open overhead bins and retrieve heavy luggage. This psychological prioritization of property over life created physical bottlenecks, devastating the volumetric flow rate of the narrow aisles. The extreme demographic complexity of the manifest compounded the crisis. There were 67 young children on board. When a 7-year-old girl was separated from her family, her panicked parents physically fought against the flow of evacuating traffic to find her. Outside, the fierce wind shear and the exterior fire physically ripped away, melted, or tangled the deployed emergency slides. 7 of the 10 emergency slides failed, leaving only 3 functional exits at the rear of the aircraft. Irrational human attachment to luggage and the severe weather condensed a 300-person evacuation down to a dangerously narrow, high-pressure funnel. The airport fire brigade deployed instantly, but made a catastrophic positional error upon arriving at the burning fuselage. They parked directly in front of the active evacuation slides, blocking the fleeing passengers. The massive physical footprint of these heavy airport fire trucks immediately turned a rescue asset into a physical hazard. The tactical fire suppression also failed. Individual firefighters utilized uncoordinated water streams, focusing entirely on the superficial exterior flames. While fighting those exterior flames, the crews entirely ignored a localized, intense inferno building underneath the aircraft, inside the right landing gear bay. The unmitigated heat in the gear bay eventually reached the flashpoint of the aircraft's center fuel tank. A violent explosion launched a 15-meter section of the right wing into the air, tragically killing 1 responding firefighter. During this blast, the captain and crew were still inside the toxic, burning cabin. They refused to leave until they found the missing 7-year-old girl, who, unknown to them, had already escaped. The preservation of life on Flight 521 illustrates that the safety of a modern airframe relies on an unbroken chain of human-machine logic, accurate environmental data, and precise ground response.